Good evening, folks. This is The Weird Part, and I'm your host, Vincent Treewell. Tonight is going to be a solo episode, and it's going to be rather unusual. I do want to give a warning before we get started, because there are some heavy events that we're going to be discussing here. If you are going to be negatively impacted by discussing suicide, murder, or a missing child, it would probably be best not to listen to this one. Um, at the same time, I hope to do this right and to show respect for the victims and their families, and to not try to be sensationalist or to try to inject the occult and the paranormal into places that they may not actually be. But having said all that, there are some very strange things that have been going on in the Devil's Lake region. I originally intended on doing this episode a couple of weeks ago. In fact, it might be more like a month ago. And I intended it basically as a update on a unsolved murder case and a missing child case, which I have nothing to prove that they're connected, but are awfully, both in their own right, awfully strange cases. And I don't know that they're connected, but I would not at all be amazed if they were somehow. And both are unsolved, and that is in no way a, you know, condemnation of law enforcement, which has been very active and has done, I think, everything possible at a local, state, and federal level to solve these cases, and just has not been able to do so far. So yes, the Devil's Lake deceptions does not refer to any kind of cover-up, because I don't think there is one, but rather to the fact that some things are being covered up by whoever committed them, and there are people out there who know a hell of a lot more than they're letting on. And I think that's an indisputable fact. I'm going to be mentioning three, really four separate cases, which may or may not have any connection, but all of which are very strange. The earliest, I'll just jump right in here. That's kind of where it's at. That's what it's going to be tonight. And this is probably going to be at least a two-parter, because there's just a lot of material here. And a lot of it is very strange. Just very unusual things that have happened in the Devil's Lake region and are not resolved as of this point. So the first, and the one that I originally intended on focusing on, is an unsolved murder that happened back in 2020. And just briefly, because I'm going to bring more detail on all of these and show where they cross paths and such. At least that's my intention. So I'm going to be very undetailed at the beginning, just to introduce the case. And in 2020, in mid-October, October 14th, in broad daylight at about 11:40 a.m., a young man, at least he was 24 at the time, from Wauwatosa, named John Schmutzer, was hiking. He was hiking on the Devil's Lake State Park on a recognized trail, and a man came running up, brutally stabbed him to death, and then continued to run away. That was mid-October of 2020, and still no one has been arrested. No one has been named as a suspect or a person of interest. No arrests made, no charges filed, obviously. Um, Despite an enormous amount of police work that has been devoted to it, to this solving this murder, which happened in public and in front of what has been described in the press as 15 witnesses. Not all witnesses saw the crime, but 15 witnesses saw the man who is believed to have committed it. That would be case one, the John Schmutzer, which is Schmutzer. He was from Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, which is a suburb adjoining the city of Milwaukee, and he was a graduate of Wauwatosa West High, as are my kids. So, I mean, there's a real local connection there that, has stayed in my mind. And, well, we'll get to that. The second case happened almost exactly a year ago on June 12th of 2023. So we're pushing right up on the 1 year anniversary. 13-year-old James Yablonsky, which is Yoblonski, went missing. He at the time was believed to be a runaway and was believed to possibly be in the woods, in the kind of the wilderness environment, practicing like survival camping. Now, none of that's proven because he hasn't been seen since, and a tremendous amount of effort has been devoted to finding him. The FBI has been involved. In both of these cases, you have the DNR involved, the Department of Natural Resources, because they involve a state park, and you have the Sauk County Sheriff's Department. I believe also in both of them, the police department for the city of Baraboo, which is the county seat, has also been involved. So yes, he's been missing and he has not been seen since June 12th of last year. We'll go much more into detail, but that's kind of the facts there. Missing teen, but again, he was 13. So, I mean, he was very much a child. James Lonsky. The third case that I only became aware of when I started looking through news updates for the first two. Someone in March 18th of this year, so a little over 2 months ago, took their own life, committed suicide in the Devil's Lake State Park area. While originally the DNR said that it was ruled that it appears to be a suicide, the coroner was involved. They said no information will be released until next of kin have been notified. Since then, there has been, and believe me, if I've just failed as a researcher and it actually is out there, I'd love to be wrong. You can just tell me feel free to update me and tell me what happened. Because from everything I've been digging through in the last couple of weeks, nothing more has been released. The coroner did make the statement that the deceased was an adult man and that they had brought Mr. Lebonsky, James Lebonsky's father, to identify the body to make sure that this was not the body of his missing son, which it was not. This was an adult male. It was implied that more would be released in the future, but nothing more has been said. Absolutely nothing. I don't want to pry into a family's pain, and I know that some people don't want it known that their loved ones took their own life. And I can have certainly have sympathy for that. I have lost way too many people to suicide, and it's an extremely painful thing. However, it is customary to release a very brief news article about just their name, age, and where they're from. And that has not happened. Nothing has been released other than one report that he was an adult man and he was shown to the missing kid's father to make sure that it wasn't him. Other than that, nothing. Now, it's been over 2 months. That raises questions. Not because I think police are covering anything up, but it seems like that maybe they haven't been able to match him to anybody. And he's some sort of John Doe, which is a very strange thing because everybody has somebody. And, it's unusual to just have this person took their life and we have no idea who they are. So there's that. As a comparison of how it usually works, another person died. I'm not suggesting that there's a connection or that it wasn't what the police say it was, because hiking in a very steep, hilly area can be very dangerous. But back on August 15th of 2023, a man named Jason Gillum, Gillum, age 42, from Fort Wayne, Indiana, fell about 50 feet and was killed. But he died on the 15th, and his body was found that same day. And then his details were released in a very brief news story 2 days later. The fact it would take 2 months and hear absolutely nothing about the guy who killed himself seems strange. Okay. I don't know what that means because there are other possibilities. If his death is in fact connected somehow to the first two stories, it's a very tangled web. And that's why you haven't heard from me in a couple weeks. I planned on this being a pretty brief update on 2 unsolved crimes. And it became every thread that I pulled unraveled into something more and something more and something more and something more. And I don't know what the answer is, but I know there's people out there that do. And they haven't been reached yet. They certainly haven't come forward yet, even though within the first 6 months of John Schmutzer being murdered, and I'll go into the details on that because it was an absolutely bizarre murder. Unfortunately, most murders tend to be dumbly obvious. Motive tends to be clearly apparent, and while the motive may be something totally stupid, it is still a clear motive. In this, there is no motive. There's no discernible motive at all, and that's very unusual. But yes, we'll get more in detail with Mr. Schmutzer and with the missing kid, and with a couple other things. But I don't want to drag in the fact that Devil's Lake is a very unusual place. It always has been. When I say always, I'm only going back the first 15,000 years or so that the ancestors of the Ho-Chunk Nation indigenous people lived here and had a ton of folklore about this being a very enchanted area, and not always in a good way. I'm not, trying to occult somebody's murder, or by the flip side of that, I'm not trying to imply that anyone who is involved in a mystic practice or something like that was somehow involved in this. I don't think that's the case at all. But it's a strange area. It's not usual. Just for one way of comparison, just to kind of give a couple of statistics. So yes, Sauk County total, including everything in Sauk County, has a population of about 65,000 people. By way of comparison, Milwaukee has well over 900,000. Dane County, where Madison is, has well over 500,000. And Brown County, where the Green Bay Packers play, has well over 250,000. Okay. So Sauk County is very rural. There is Wisconsin Dells, a well-known, at least in Wisconsin, Midwest, I'd say in the Midwest, a well-known water park. And there are, of course, there's Devil's Lake, and there's Baraboo and the Circus Museum. There's many things to see there, but the local population is quite small. And it is rural and it is wilderness. And the towns are not, this is not the big city. And even in the big city, crimes like what happened to John Smutzer don't really happen almost ever. It's clearly not an armed robbery. By all indications and everything that the police have revealed and everything that witnesses have revealed, it was a stranger to stranger murder. And it was done with a knife and in public with witnesses in broad daylight. And the killer got away on foot. I can't really begin to tell you how strange all of those things are. If this was an armed robbery, I almost certainly would have used a gun and not done this to someone who's on foot. When you're on foot, because anybody who's hiking those trails is probably in pretty good physical shape. And if you run up on somebody with a knife and try to rob them, they may chase after you and they may have a knife too. Many people carry a knife while hiking because not to fight with, but just for practical reasons of cutting brush. And, you sometimes need a knife when you're hiking around. Also, you'd want a better getaway than that. So I believe the police are completely right in saying that this is not an armed robbery, attempted robbery gone wrong, something like that. No, it's not like that. Also, there's no indication, despite extensive interviews, by 6 months after the crime occurred, the police updated that they had interviewed over 150 people and had received hundreds of tips and had submitted dozens of items to the state crime lab. And so far, 3 years after their update, it still has not yielded any fruit. There is an unknown person of interest, a person who's been described, but there were no cameras, there's no pictures of him, despite the fact that Devil's Lake has trail cams, and it has been suggested by the police that at least one of those trail cams was not functional. But it just does seem amazing that 15 people saw this guy and there's no pictures of him. He's been referred to as the runner by law enforcement, and he's described as being 5'10" to 6 feet tall, wearing what may be a hoodie, but dark colored head and face coverings, which also was 2020. It may be a COVID mask. He apparently had ripped jeans and a black sweatshirt and ran up to Mr. Schmutzer and just stabbed him to death out of the blue and then took off on foot. And again, just a bizarre crime that just does not happen. And when it does, it does happen now and again. There, bad things happen everywhere. When it happens, however, such a person is usually caught very quickly because a person that disturbed isn't good at covering their tracks and having a great backup plan or getaway set up. No, they're just completely out there and they're usually caught very quickly. That this has lasted 3.5 years is amazing to me and just very strange. And I have to be honest, I don't know why anybody would do that. I feel I can safely say, based on people I know and things I've read about and experienced, that this was not in any conventional sense an occult crime. That's not how occult rituals work. But what it was, I have no idea. Nobody's been able to connect anything to John Smutzer and an unknown person in this area. And there's been hundreds of tips at least, and none of those have panned out into a suspect with a name. And that's very strange. And I have to say, the longer this goes on unsolved, the weirder the likely probable answer is. That I don't know why someone would do that, but it seems really strange. So yes, there's that. Then I'm at this time not going through every single detail of John Smutzer's murder because there's a lot there. But as I went through the news releases and the reporting over the last 3.5 years, it basically comes down to there hasn't been a whole lot of progress made. 8 people's DNA was sent to the state crime lab, and 2 were cleared rather quickly. But the other 6, nothing has been reported that I've been able to find saying that anything developed from that, which is strange. And frankly, stabbings usually have some blood from the perpetrator. That's almost universal. Not always, nothing's 100%, but that is very frequent that some of the killer's blood is at the scene. Nothing has come back on that yet. So we're left kind of not knowing what to think. There was early on in the case some attention given to a man who appeared to be, and his picture's available online. I don't know if he was named, and if he was, I wouldn't name him anyway because he doesn't seem to be a person of any interest. A man who seemed to be of Indian, descent, who just seemed to be walking the trail. But the police did want to talk to him. I don't know. I've not been able to find out whether they ever found him and talked to him. He just would have been one more of the witnesses who saw the killer run past. Nobody's suggesting that he's the killer. Just that, and this has come up a couple of times. Sometimes the police have been able to find the person they're looking for just to ask them what they saw. Other times they haven't been able to, because this is a tourist attraction and people do come in and out. But it's been reported that 15 people saw the runner, and yet nobody has been able to identify him, which is just a bizarre situation. Now, I don't know whether there's any connection whatsoever between the murder of John, John, John Smutzer and the disappearance of James Lonsky. Those seem to be unrelated, but when you have this really weird unsolved murder hanging out there, and then this kid goes missing, and again, there's been a huge effort to find him, it begs the question whether this is somehow connected. Is there something there that relates those two crimes? I say crimes. The 13-year-old at the time appears to have been a runaway, but the fact that nothing has been found, I say nothing, I will give a caveat that things were found, but we'll get to that very early on. But that he hasn't been found implies that a crime occurred. He is 13. That's an awfully difficult age to just disappear voluntarily. He doesn't have a driver's license or any money of significance. It's tough to think that he would be able to just go somewhere and not come back. And at the same time, and again, I don't want to be overly graphic, but to be blunt, a 13-year-old is a hard person to hide, unlike, say, an infant. The fact that he hasn't been found dead or alive, or even seen, I haven't seen one reference to him being spotted, like in a credible way where we could say, oh yeah, it's probably him that was there this place, implies that something happened. And there are people who know more than what they're letting on. And I think that's screamingly obvious, that there's more here than has come out. That's why they're still working them. That's why law enforcement is still working them. The family has expressed frustration, which is 1000% understandable, that how hasn't this been solved in one way or another? Even if it was tragic and he was deceased, I mean, you'd think that would be found pretty quickly, relatively quickly, that we wouldn't be coming up on a 1-year anniversary with nothing. But that's what appears to have happened. An update by the Sauk County Sheriff's Department. Various searches were conducted on several electronic devices believed to have Ben and James Lonsky's possession prior to his disappearance. In the early months of 2023, 2 searches were conducted using the device's web browser regarding the means of traveling out of state. One of these devices is owned by the Lonsky family, and the other is a device that was issued to James by the Baraboo School District. There are also several internet searches related to physical locations inside the state of Wisconsin. Investigators have followed up on each of these browser searches, including physical searches of several areas. These follow-ups have not produced any evidence that James was ever physically present at these locations after his disappearance. The Lonsky family has been made aware of these search locations and have cooperated with the Sheriff's Department's efforts. Our investigators are continuing the search for James Lonsky and ask the public to contact Sauk County Sheriff's Department. And they list the contact info. But yes, originally he had taken off in his family car. However, the car was found rather quickly after his disappearance. And wait one moment here. some pretty copious notes here that I want to get to. So yes, this is from a press release by the Sauk County Sheriff's Department on the day of James Yablonsky's disappearance. That at 7:33 a.m. on today's date, Sauk County Sheriff's Department was contacted by the father of 13-year-old James Lebonsky, saying James had taken a family vehicle. The vehicle was located at approximately 8:46 a.m. by a Sauk County deputy. A ping of James' cell phone, conducted by the sheriff's office with assistance from the Division of Criminal Investigation, led to the location currently being searched by law enforcement near U.S. Highway 12 and Sauk Hill. Deputies located a makeshift campsite where property belonging to James was located. Law enforcement is continuing to search the area and have asked for additional law enforcement agencies to assist. For everyone's safety, please avoid the area of Sauk Hill because of heavy traffic and limited visibility. So yes, that came out the day that he went missing. And they did find a makeshift campsite. They did find his cell phone. They did search the cell phone, found some internet searches. Apparently, nothing has come of this in the last almost a year. And that is where it stands, which just, begs the question. So if he was reported missing at 7:33 and they found the car and the campsite less than an hour and a half later, what happened in that time? And nobody knows. Well, that's not true. People do know. Humans on this planet do know. But nobody involved in this investigation knows. And the FBI has gotten involved, and currently you have multiple agencies on this, and the family has put up a sign and offered a reward, and people are and have gone on, and there have been searches, civilian searches, and just nothing has borne fruit here of what happened to this young man. And it seems absolutely bizarre. And I'm speculating, and this is pure speculation, has no legal value, has probably not much merit for the investigation, but we're here talking. So yeah, it does not escape my notice that both the man that was murdered and the boy that went missing, are within about a decade and kind of seem to fit the same profile of being fit and, outdoorsman. And I don't know if that means anything at all, but it just seems absolutely bizarre that one would be murdered in such a way and the other would simply disappear at an age where it's really hard to do much of anything like rent a car or, buy stuff. It seems these are very strange crimes. And then we have the third person who is, they haven't released any more information. I was about to say they don't know anything more. I can't say that because I don't know that. I don't know whether possibly the reason that the adult man that killed himself in the Devil's Lake Park, why there's what appears to be a media blackout on his identity, unless it's somehow connected to these two things. This all seems very, very strange. And this is where I'm going to go to a place that, I'm not saying I know what happened. I absolutely do not know what happened. Um, but the area has a history, and it has an immense history. And the Devil's Lake um, has been viewed as a mystical power site by people who are interested in that sort of thing for a very long time. And back in, I believe, the 70s, even the 80s, um, there were occultists based in Chicago. And now, be really careful how I say this, because they were never even accused of doing anything illegal or violent. And I don't want to make an accusation and do a kind of satanic panic thing that shouldn't be there. But it is, it's a known fact that there were occult groups that came to Devil's Lake in the 70s and 80s to do rituals. And no, none of those rituals involved anyone being harmed, that anything that I've ever read. But I will speculate that perhaps some disturbed person, not a member of any actual organization, but just people that are out there that do crazy things, may have been trying to do something specifically in Devil's Lake because of that history. That would not surprise me. That some lone nut was influenced by things that you can easily find on the internet that describe doing rituals in the Devil's Lake area, and that might be a factor in one, two, or even all three of these events. Also, and again, I've been pretty positive about law enforcement in this because I think they've really done a very solid job. You see cases in the media frequently where someone's death is allowed to go uninvestigated, basically, or disappearance. This is not that. They have been, in both of these cases, handling many tips and interviewing everybody possible, and have done their job. You know, the police can do an absolutely great job and still not end up solving the crime. That is reality. So this is not, a slam, but it's just a question. Kind of a, we're speculating here. I wouldn't have been quite so sure to label that man falling to his death, though that does happen. If you go through the history of Devil's Lake, it happens every couple of years. That does happen. The cliffs can be dangerous, and certainly that can happen. But when you already have an unsolved murder, a bizarre unsolved murder, and a missing kid, I might not have been quick so to say that it was just a fall. I don't have anything to back that up, and it probably was just a fall, but that's my take on it. Um, Also, I don't know how much investigation went into determining that this was a suicide on the 18th, March 18th. If and sometimes, I mean, I wasn't there. Obviously, I didn't see the crime scene, and nothing's been released, so nobody knows anything. Um, but I mean, nobody in the public knows anything. But I would have been awfully hesitant to label much of anything as a suicide when there's this unsolved murder and this missing teenager. That, and again, we're talking about an area where the entire county is 65,000 people. That wouldn't, that's some of individual suburbs around here. That this is a rural environment. That doesn't mean things are somehow inherently different, or people are better, or people are worse. No, human nature, human condition is what it is. But you don't have that much happen to start with, just by sheer numbers. Um, I would have been, and I'm putting myself in somebody's shoes where I have no idea, but I would have been awfully cautious on labeling anything as suicide until I knew that, just because of the unsolved strange things that are already going. And, you know, I don't know what the answer is, but somebody does. People do know things that none of this stuff is unsolvable. And I believe it will be solved, but it hasn't been so far. And it's been very, very weird. So yes, the whole cult angle, again, I am not pointing at people who do a magical practice or into the mystical arts or what have you. But sometimes unhinged people try to do things that they've read about, heard about, seen, and grossly misinterpret. And I wouldn't be stunned if any of these weren't because of that. That's just some speculation. But it is my speculation. There was, well, there's a couple other things I do want to mention, but um, one thing that I want to get at is, I don't know whether this means anything or absolutely nothing, but it was strange to me that the local news report about the billboard that's been put up that shows um, the missing teen, Lonsky, and the murdered man, um, John Schmutzner, came out the same day, which would be March 18th, that the man was found dead, whose name and information have not been released. March 18th, the local news has a follow-up on both the unsolved murder of John Schmutzmer. I'm sorry, Schmutzmer. I don't want to mess up his name. And the missing juvenile, James Lonsky. And they're together on the billboard. And this story is reported with the picture of the billboard on the day that they find the body of the man that they say took his own life. I don't get too far into numerology and dates having meanings. I don't dismiss that stuff, but I don't really go too hard into it. I do believe that straight up plain coincidences do happen. But this one kind of really tests the limits there because there hasn't been a hell of a lot of coverage about this. And in fact, it's been hard to find independent, confirmation for facts and stuff. Looking, through the internet, through websites, through newspapers.com, through various networks, affiliates in the area, through local newspapers. It's been hard to find much coverage. It really has. And the same day that there's an update on both Schmutzer and Lonsky, a person's found dead and it's ruled a suicide. I mean, that just seems like some very strange coincidentalism, that seems very weird. And I don't know if it means anything or means absolutely nothing or somewhere in between. But it did happen like that. So, at this point, I'm going to wrap things up for this episode. I do expect to have full on to have a follow up because there's still a lot more I'd like to talk about with this. But I wanted to at least get this done and out there and brought to people's attention. And these are three very strange situations at a minimum. John Smutsner's death is murder is absolute tragedy and a crime, and I believe it's solvable and will be solved. James Lonsky's disappearance. Hopefully, this young man is still alive. Again, I also believe that it's solvable and will be solved. And then I don't know what to say about the person who was found dead on March 18th because what can I say other than the coroner said he's an adult man? That's it. And it's not Jablonski. It's not Jablonski. So there we stand. That's a lot of unsolved, strange, and terrible violence for a lightly populated rural area. But it's all going on and it's all still unsolved. So that's my take on it. Feel free to respond. I always appreciate feedback. And all of these situations are definitely in the weird part. This has been the weird part. I am your host, Vincent Truewell. As always, thanks for listening and good night.